What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our college football channel. It's time for my 5 takeaways from rivalry week. You know, it seems like it was just yesterday that Northwestern, Nebraska were facing off in Ireland. Ohio State was hosting Notre Dame in what we thought was, this huge non-conference matchup. Alabama was going on the road to face Texas and almost getting upset. Oregon getting blown out by Georgia. All these things that, we're in weeks 1, 2, early in the year. They seem like they were just yesterday, and now the season, it's over. The regular season is over. I got a little bit sad last night as the games were coming to an end, just thinking about how Saturdays are going to be different. We still got the conference championship games coming up, but those games really lost a lot of the we're actually that's one of my takeaways, so I'm not going to get into that just yet, but it's just different when, a normal college football Saturday is just, it's special. You got games all day long, multiple games on, 5, 6 games, trying to keep up with them, and it's so much fun. But it just seems like this season flew by. This, to me, was the fastest season that we've ever had, and maybe that was just me, but it seemed like it went really quick. So we go to rivalry weekend, and there was plenty of excitement this weekend. I mean, this season did not disappoint. This was a crazy season. Not over yet. We'll see how it ends, but we'll start with my takeaways, and we'll start with Michigan, Ohio State, obviously the big game from the weekend. And my takeaway is that Michigan is just better than Ohio State. We're a better team this year. They're a better program right now. They have better coaches. This is just a better football team. And, it's funny because, I guess it was my curse that really got to Ohio State, but I had been picking Michigan to win this game since at least the Penn State game. I don't remember if I maybe had switched my pick before that or not. But, a lot of Ohio State fans calling me a hater and all this stuff. Just that I would even suggest that Michigan would beat Ohio State. And, early in the year, I talked about Ohio State being a little bit overrated. And they, I think, proved over time that they're a really good team this year. But, I had Michigan all these weeks, said they were going to win because of their style of play. And then I switched my pick only because of the Blake Corum injury. I did not think Michigan would be able to win this game. Also, I didn't know about Donovan Edwards. And if Donovan Edwards does not play in this game, maybe Michigan does not win. So those injuries definitely made it hard to pick this game. But, I felt like this Michigan team, especially at full strength, would be able to beat Ohio State. And again, you can watch my prediction videos all throughout the year until this past week, of course. But what Michigan did, I think that Ohio State maybe outsmarted themselves a little bit in this game. If you go back to the first half, Ohio State they just sold out on the run. They sold out on the run. They said, you're not going to run the football on us. No safety help. Michigan hits a couple of long plays. And, that's really what kept Michigan in the game early, because it felt like Ohio State was the better team outside of those big plays in the first half. But then you go to the second half, Ohio State maybe, they tried to play more of a regular defense, and Michigan ran it down their throats. And so really there was no answer. There was nothing Ohio State was going to do. I think a better strategy probably would have been just to play them straight up and try to hold them to field goals in the red zone. Michigan has really struggled at times this year in the red zone, but they didn't do that. So I'm going to give Michigan's coaches the credit. I think they outcoached them. They had a great game plan. Came out actually throwing the football more than they normally do, and then made great plays, big plays that they had to make. So give Michigan a lot of credit. They dominated the second half of this game and proved that they are the better team. And maybe they're good enough to possibly win it all. This is a very good Michigan team. Talked about their defense, how as a unit, the whole defense, they're better than they were last year. Their offensive line, I believe, is better than they were last year. If Blake Corum gets back and gets healthy, this is a team that can win a national championship this year. And I think they proved that with what they did to Ohio State. So big win there for Michigan. Man, where are all these Ohio State fans that just kept calling me a hater? Like I have something against Ohio State. Look, it's just what I saw. It's just I felt like Michigan would win this game. It turned out to be true. It's nothing against Ohio State. I think Ohio State's a great team, but Michigan's really good as well. And let's go now to number 2. Georgia, Michigan, and TCU. They're now locks in the playoff. I don't see any way that they miss the playoff. Georgia, I mean, if there's a blowout possibly to TCU, I still think they're in, though. I mean, I don't see... Maybe if TCU gets blown out, Ohio State could sneak in there with one loss if neither team is a conference champion. But pretty much I'd say they're locks. I mean, it would take just a complete collapse by TCU. And based off of what they've done all year, I don't see that happening. They could lose that game to Kansas State, sure. But as long as it's a good competitive game, they're going to be in. So Georgia, Michigan, TCU, they're in. And then we look to that final playoff spot. Well, it's USC if they win. If they win the Pac-12 championship, USC is in. So we now know the playoff picture. It's going to be, assuming there are no upsets, right there at the top, Georgia, number 2, Michigan, number 3, TCU, number 4, USC. Of course, if USC loses, then that's going to change things. It's going to be an interesting debate on Ohio State and Alabama. I understand the arguments for both sides. We'll see where those teams are ranked this week, because that's going to tell us. If Ohio State's ahead of Alabama this week, then Ohio State would get that 4th spot. If Alabama is ahead this week, well, then Alabama would get that 4th spot if it did become available. So that's interesting, talking about the playoff scenarios. But as long as USC takes care of business against Utah in the Pac-12 championship and a revenge game, a game that they were very close to winning the first time, then USC is going to be in. And we now know our 4 playoff teams. But as crazy as this year has been, you never know. We could still see some chaos. So let's go to number 4. And talking about these conference championship games, 4 of the 5 Power 5 conference championship games are meaningless, really, in terms of the college football playoff. You got Clemson, North Carolina in the ACC championship. Those 2 teams are out of it. There's no chance for either team to get in. And so that game really just doesn't mean much. I mean, these games, I probably shouldn't put meaningless, because there is an Orange Bowl spot on the line there. Conference championship is still a big deal, but they don't mean anything in terms of the playoff, which is just not what we normally see going into this final Saturday. We go to the Big Ten. Michigan, doesn't really matter what happens, they're in. Same thing with Georgia in the SEC, and same thing with TCU in the Big 12, like I just talked about earlier. So the big game is going to be the Pac-12 championship. USC and Utah. USC playing to get into the college football playoff. That is going to be the big game, and that'll of course be on Friday. So in terms of Saturday, I mean, the playoff field will be set going into Saturday, really. The seeding could change if we see some upsets, but we'll know really the 4 teams going into Saturday, which it is kind of a bummer when you look at all these great conference championship games and how much fun they usually are, and to go through and say, well, these games really don't matter. Imagine a 12-team playoff. With a 12-team playoff, these games would matter. They would matter a whole lot. In fact, Purdue will be playing for a chance to go into that 12-team playoff. Same thing with North Carolina and Clemson. Same thing with Kansas State. Even LSU would still have a chance to get into the college football playoff, a 12-team playoff. So that's why I think the 12-team playoff is just going to make these games mean a lot more here at the end of the season. And you're going to have teams that would have normally been out of it still with a chance. I know there's the downside. Nobody wants to see a 4-loss team in there. But, hey, if they can win their conference championship, why not give them a shot? Again, I see both sides of this argument. Another game in the American is going to be a big one, though. Tulane and UCF, they're going to be playing for a spot in the Cotton Bowl, in the New Year's Six Bowl. So that'll be a big game as well. So, again, it's college football. It's great. The games are going to be fun. But in terms of the playoff picture, the games really just don't mean anything, at least the ones on Saturday. And now we go to the final takeaway here. November was crazy and full of upsets. Just look back at this month and how wild it was. And, Saturday was just fit right in with that. What about Texas A&M beating LSU? Who saw that one coming? Texas A&M has been terrible this year. Now, I do think LSU is a little bit overrated this season, just because of their win over Alabama. Everyone thought they were a top 5 team. But to see Texas A&M do this, I mean, really impressed with them, the way they finished. We saw Oregon fall to Oregon State. Clemson loses to South Carolina, and that's the second upset in a row for South Carolina. Just imagine if Tennessee would have been able to win that game. Tennessee would be looking great right now for that 4th playoff spot. So, I mean, it was just a crazy year. But in terms of of the final rankings here, I was just comparing the number of one-loss teams, two-loss teams, undefeated teams compared to last year, and they're really about the same number. I think there might be there was one more last year maybe, but it really wound up being what it always is. I think this year was just different because, and I said this going into November, if you go back and watch my video, it was the first, I think, takeaway video as we were going into November. I said in that video that it was about to get crazy. There were all these scenarios with about 6-7 teams with one loss or undefeated teams, and who's going to get in the playoff. What did I tell you guys at that point? I said, look, we're into the month of November. This is going to work itself out. We're going to see upsets. We're not going to have all these one-loss teams. It never works out that way. And that proved to be really true because that's exactly what happened. We saw a lot of teams that were up there that lost, and they finished with 2 losses or even 3 losses for some of them. You know, look at LSU now with 3 losses. It worked itself out, and it always does. It just always does, because it is so hard to stay on top for 12 weeks, to play your A game 12 weeks. You know, everybody plays 6, 7, 8 games that are potential losses, and you're usually going to lose a game or two. I think parity also was really big this year. I don't think, you know, maybe Georgia and Michigan are great teams, but I don't think there are as many really, really good teams this year. I don't believe, I'll say it like this, I don't believe any team this year would beat the national champion from the past, 10, 11, 12, 13 years. I don't believe they would. I just think that they're, Georgia and Michigan are really good, but I don't think they're as elite as some of the other teams we've seen, like Georgia last year, Alabama in 2020, LSU in 2019. All of those teams, I think, would beat this year's Georgia or this year's Michigan. And I, just think there's a lot of parity. In the SEC, we were not that far away from having 13 out of the 14 teams going to a bowl game. I mean, there was just so much parity this season. I think there really, again, aren't any great teams. I think, everybody's talking about Alabama being, this great team this year. Look how close they were. They 2 plays away from being undefeated, but they were also 3 plays away from being 7-5. It's just been how this season has been, the parity. And I talked about that early in the year. Anyone really can beat anyone, and that's why we saw so many upsets, and it was just such a fun season. This was probably the funnest season that I can remember in a long, long time. Almost over now as we go to the conference championship games. We'll see how it works out. It would be fitting if Purdue upset Michigan, USC loses. We see some big upsets, but it would definitely cause chaos. But at the same time, other than USC, maybe it wouldn't cause chaos because, like I said, I think those top 3 teams are already locked in. So a crazy season, a crazy November, and that's something else I was going to point back to. Coming into November, I just think we had more undefeated and one-loss teams than we normally do at that point of the season, and that's why it felt like November was so crazy, because you came into this month with a ton of undefeated and one-loss teams, and of course a lot of those teams, some of them had to play each other, and then of course a lot of them just were upset, and it was, again, just a crazy month. So your takeaways from rivalry week and maybe just this whole season in general, let me know down in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more here on the SG1 Sports College Football Channel.